or whatever the term is.
Exactly, yeah.
Which is something that I struggle with immensely as a perfectionist that knows it's been bad for me.
You know that perfectionism is just a strategy to avoid criticism?
That might totally be it.
Yeah, and I say that as a hardcore perfectionist myself, and you know I'd avoid if someone's like, "Oh, you can just add some beats if you want to," I'd be like, "Well, I can't do that because I'll have to spend a week, you know, putting everything in phase and realigning all the kick drums, and you know, take me 2 weeks to find the perfect kick drum." You know what I mean? And it's just like, yeah. So
how much time do we waste on our perfectionism rather than pushing, you know, the real stuff forward?
Yeah,
it's horrible.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just you know, the fact that we're able to acknowledge it is huge. You know. But then also once you start looking, it's tremendously liberating as well, because if you realize like ideas are more important than perfect, then rather than looking for perfect, you look for ideas. So when I was younger, the biggest production mistake I'd make was like any song that came in, I'd be like, right, and roll up my sleeves and then immediately like start trying to be the cleverest motherfucker in the world and impress people by all these ridiculous moves.
Yeah.
But I realized after a while, like I spent years of my life kind of automating parameters, trying to turn nothing into something. And now, like, you know, I've hit a point of, I hope this doesn't sound too much like a flex, but I've hit a point of maturity in the studio where I'm perfectly comfortable sitting there with an artist for 3 hours and not touching anything and just talking to them until we realize, like, okay, that's what we're going for. And then mentally you go, okay, so we're going to grab this, this, and this, and we're going to surround this idea. Now it's like we know which direction we're pointed in.
Yeah, I think that's also like like you said, maturity. I think it's like a lack of ego. Like when you've been around the corner like enough times, you don't feel like I need to do this. I need to prove myself. It's like, okay, I can rest on my, on my accomplishments like, okay, we could do this. And, you know, I don't have to.
It's a really good point. And it's funny.
Don't have to flex.
Yeah. If I can segue you back into Bjork, like after I finished her record Biophilia with her, I was like, oh God, I was early 30s at that point. That act came out 10 years ago now, which is kind of nuts in terms of time flying. But I literally like finished that and was like, I've just made the most avant-garde record of my generation. Like nothing left to prove. Like genuinely, this is like, it was the world's first iPad app. We had fucking robotic pendulums. We had robot-controlled pipe organs. We had Bjork on it. We had 17 8-time signatures. I programmed shit in Max MSP. Do you know what it's like? I've proven everything I possibly need to about being clever. And that wasn't the motivation for it, but was like, okay, I'm really like comfortable and confident in that now. So now I can really just trust that stuff will come through. And
that's amazing.
But it was kind of interesting moment to just be like, you don't need to prove anything anymore to people.
How long did that last? That feeling of I don't need to prove anything anymore, like until you kind of.
It's just only got deeper. You know what I mean?
That's amazing. That's so cool.
And that's I really want your listeners to understand. This is like a liberating concept, right? When we're not like the studio, the recording studio is a wonderful, magical place, but it's just in service of sharing ideas. So
Absolutely.
Once you hit a point of realizing like, oh, my studio is working for me, then it's all about ideas. And ideas are if you talk to Travis, I don't know if he would have got into nonlinear inputs and outputs. So let's break down this concept a little bit, right? Like when I was a teenager, I would get manual labor jobs. Like you have to dig this hole or you have to clear away these weeds, or even, you know, if you're a waiter, like you've got a table of 38 people and you have to get out 38 dinners or something like that. But with an idea to a great song, it's not like, well, it's not great until you get to 100. So you have to do 100 studio moves before it's great. Do you know what I mean? A great idea could take 15 minutes or it could take 15 months. So when you really grasp that like decorrelation of effort with quality of results, doesn't mean you don't work hard. Like I do work really hard, and definitely like at certain stages of the process, we really want to have our shit together, but it's not about proving something as a result of doing something technical. And certainly as a result of, you know, I mentioned being able to work with so many different producers and engineers. I've really got to work with some of the best producers and engineers in the UK. And just seeing all these different ways of working can really like go, okay, we're in this context, I need to take this tool out of the toolbox and use it, as opposed to I only have a hammer. You know, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. You know, that whole thing? Yeah. Like I just produced, well, I'm just wrapping up mixing for a Canadian artist called Isque, and we wound up going to Mexico City to work down there. We just needed a break. She was going to come to my studio, but I'd been in here on my own for like almost a year and a half, and she'd just been in Mexico City, loved it. And I was like, we should go there. And she was really into that. But we wound up, halfway through the sessions deciding to book a bigger studio and pull in a whole ensemble. And so my move as a producer was like, I just trusted my engineer and I did not go into the control room at all. I spent the whole time in the live room with the band. And it was, whereas if it was 10 years ago, I would have been like, solo the cello mic, now solo the blah, blah, blah mic. And, I would have been like looking over his shoulder because that's what I was thinking about. But really understanding like, okay, what we need to do in this case is get a group of people that we've just thrown together for one day, a really unusual combination. Like, how are we going to turn this song into something beautiful with this set of people? So, but then later on, literally on my own, like comping vocals, tightening shit up in Melodyne for 2 weeks. So there's a lot of different skill sets that we can draw on as we go. And it's really just knowing like what's the appropriate mindset, what's the appropriate tool to be using at each stage of the process.
Yeah. And also knowing when to delegate, and get the ego out of the way and say like, okay, I don't need to do this. He's great or she's great. Mm-hmm. Like, I'll let them do that.
Yeah.
So important.
Yeah.
So if we could go back to Bjork for 2 seconds.
All right.
When she has these like esoteric ideas of like, this is going to sound like wood, or this is going to sound like stones hitting, copper. Has she already written the songs, or are the songs being written in the studio at the same time? Like, what does that look like?
Both. I think, she'll tend to have a bit more of an intuition about the universe that she's building. And she's fascinating to be around because basically like as many different ways as you could ever imagine a song being written or produced, like she does on one album. So, literally coming into the studio in the morning being like, I dreamed a melody, and then she'll like play it on a keyboard and then like sing the vocal on top of it. Like she has an ability to just hold an idea in her head and like make it happen. Stuff like she has a song called Declare Independence, and it was like Mark Bell just brought in a track and she just sung on it. She'll like do stuff with people from the ground up. Like when we were working with Timbaland, it was like they basically like jammed for 45 minutes and she took those away and turned those into a track. Timbaland didn't finish it, she did. But, any kind of situation. She'll also like on Biophilia, there is a song called Virus, and it was like getting later on in the record. And I built all these Max MSP kind of musical systems that she was writing on largely in a kind of improvisatory way. But she was like, yeah, I think I'll just sit down with Sibelius and she like wrote it on score in Sibelius, so, so she just, again,
has her own bag of tricks.
Yeah, she really does. And it's pretty limitless. Like she's an incredibly deep, brilliant soul, and even like, not a lot of people know this. It's like, I mentioned her and her friends all being punks, but like before that, she was in like classical music conservatory. So she can go like, oh, okay, I'll dust off my like 13-year-old chops and then like write a string arrangement or whatever, But a lot of it as well with her is just like, following her interests. Like when we were working on Volta, she was just like, oh, I've been listening to this record by Toumani Diabate and we should go to Mali and work with him. And I'd like, had just been in small windowless rooms with a few dudes mostly and kind of thought that was like quite a funny, quaint notion. Then the next day, like your tickets turn up and she'll just like fly to Africa. And because it's like, this is an interesting person and we should do something together, So I think she really understands the kind of power of personality as well. And so she, finds people that she's inspired by and goes and does stuff with them.
Man, where does that come from? Like, it's just like, I can't even imagine that kind of a mindset, to have. But I guess that's why she's a great artist.
She is, yeah, definitely, yeah.
Can I ask you a little bit about the Arcade Fire? What was working with them like? And obviously Reflector is a very different record than their previous records.
So I feel like I want to downgrade my public credits on this. Like I worked on a bunch of stuff with them, but like, Mark Lawson was their engineer who had worked with them top to bottom on records. It's just like Bjork, they have their own visions. They work on it top to bottom. So I'm like a friend of theirs. And basically when I was touring with Bjork, we wound up
You're a facilitator.
Well, no, not even. Basically when I was playing with Bjork, we wound up on the same bill a lot. So we became friends. And, when I moved to Montreal, we hung out a bunch. So just as a friend, they'd occasionally say like, hey, could you help us out with this? So on Reflector, at the time, Regine was pregnant and I had kids and I had built like a beautiful studio, which I was determined was not going to be like a brown and gray dude den, dudoir, I call them. So, you know what I mean? It had like natural light. We had like, Baltic birch on the walls and stuff. And so a bit more balanced in its energies. And Regine didn't want to do her vocals at the band studios. There's a lot of people around. So basically my contribution on Reflector was vocal production with Regine.
That's amazing.
Basically like, recording her, did all the comping and editing and tweaking and stuff like that. And then there's like one or two other songs where they're like, oh, can you help us out with like editing this or that? It's like, yeah, sure. So a bit of behind the scenes stuff, but like nothing compared to the whole like 2-year journey they'd been on. If people are most curious about my interaction with Arcade Fire, they should hunt down. I did a couple of remixes with them of Sprawl 2 and Ready to Start off the Suburbs. And basically that kind of came about a little bit because when we were on tour together, like Bjork is very plugged into club music and having dance parties and stuff like that. So we would have little sound systems on our riders, and after we played, we'd DJ and we'd have a party. So, Arcade Fire, people started hanging out with that. They'd been doing a bunch of stuff with LCD Sound System as well. So I think they were like, we've got like the Bruce Springsteen American stuff down, and now we need like some rhythm. And also, Regine's from Haiti. So, they're like, we need to just explore rhythm basically. So they actually hit me up for Ready to Start first because they said they've been trying to build this third section of the song that never worked on record. And so the remixes I did for them were all using their multi-tracks, but stripping them down and kind of like rebuilding them around the rhythm section. And that's what I did for Sprawl 2 as well. So it was like a stepping stone on their way from the first 3 records into the world with Reflector, where they were just like getting into like, let's just groove this a lot harder.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So, I have credits on there, but it's like with Bjork, it's like I was working with her top to bottom for like, years on end. With Arcade Fire. I popped in occasionally,
Nice.
And really, I especially don't want to be taking anything away from people who made the significant contributions to those records.
I think you're probably downplaying yourself a bit more than you need to, but like, it's still great to, I think just to have your foot in the door or not, that's the wrong expression. Just to have been a part of like, a record with that band would be, I don't know. I'd be super into that. So
I'm
happy for you.
Yeah. Thanks. And this is where it gets really cool. Again, just like what we're saying about like online community and stuff is there's been a few times in my life where it's like my circle of friends have just all been making amazing music and it's been really inspiring. And, like I would just, I popped in their studio like a couple of times when they were doing Reflector. I think I recorded some Winds vocals on a track, but they just record so much, who knows if it's used or not. I also worked on their record after that for about 2 months, but it was before it even turned into a record. So I just like was kind of hanging out with them. But like, yeah, just being around when people is making stuff is wonderful.
Yeah, amazing. Well, now that you have like, these credits and obviously a great career, how do you choose who to work with these days? I'm sure people reach out. I'm sure mostly you're getting hit up more than you're hitting people up. How do you decide this is an artist I want to work with? This is something I want to do.
There's a few layers to it. It's funny actually. At the start of my career, I'd think like there's like 4 or 5 factors. There's like, do you like the music? Do you like the people? Are you being paid well? Are the terms and conditions good? And if I could get like 2 out of those 4, then I'd be pretty stoked. And now I'm looking pretty much for 4 for 4. But fundamentally, when I listen to something, it's the je ne sais quoi. Like I listen just very broadly. Like, does this get me in my gut? Do I get the tingle? Do I feel that there's something there with this person? Do I recognize a vibration in this music? And then immediately after that, the big question for me is, can I bring something to the table for this artist? Like, do I feel I can help them improve this? I've actually heard some stuff where I'm like, this is great. I don't know what I would do with it. You know what I mean? Or even this is great. Like, you don't need me. But really it's like looking for that. Is there something here that I could serve, that I'm the right person to help? And then after that, it's really a case of having a conversation and seeing if I get on with them. I'm very amenable, so I pretty much get on with everyone, to be honest. But just making sure that there's like the right personal connection there. And this is where it gets interesting, right? Because sometimes you have people who reach out because they've heard stuff I do and they actually want me. And then other times you have like can you just jump on a call with someone because management or labels have suggested that we work together? And I always ask people, like, it's totally cool, but are we on a call because your management said we should work together?